All right. We should hopefully be live. So, welcome to World Quant Office Hours, the final week. Today is Tuesday, November 17th. Welcome to Office Hours. We're at the home stretch. We're working on our project together and inching our way forward to a deployment on the greater World Wide Web and opening the project up for contributions on your behalf. All right, thank you, Timur, for letting me know that things are going through, that you can hear me. I appreciate that. Thank you. One of the things we do ask as the course comes to an end is to fill out the post-course survey. We sent an email out to everyone about filling out the post-course survey, but I will put it here in the chat. So please fill out that survey when you get a chance. And we ask you to fill it out because we want to know how things went. We want to know your thoughts about our curriculum. We want to know your thoughts, your experiences, how you felt about it, so we can take that information and improve on future iterations of the course. So we are able to offer this this free course. Right, there is no charge for people who participate. So we ask that in return that you take the time to fill out this survey. We really appreciate it to get more and more feedback about our courses, so we can always improve on a future iterations and generations of this course. Sorry about that. Let's see who is with us today in Office Hours. So I see Timur, I see Anselmo, and I see Paolo. Welcome to Office Hours. I will put here on my agenda more Flask, more things about Flask, and then we will go back to our project. And things we want to do in our project are things like requirement files, requirements. We want to look at things like readmes, perhaps make files, perhaps we can talk about test-driven development, TDD, test-driven development. Yes, Timur, ask away. Yeah, no problem. Ask away. Ask your question. And you deploy using Heroku. So that is our agenda today. Let's hope we can get more progress on our project, and then we can host it on GitHub, and then I can open it up for contributions with everyone in the course. I see Soon is here. Hello, Soon. Welcome to Office Hours. Timur, you said you had a question, so feel free to ask your question. Anyone else, you're more than welcome to ask your questions, things that are apart from the agenda, things I can throw on the agenda. All right, so I see Timur's question. If we develop in another web framework, as Rails, for example, can we add code written in Python? That's a good question. I don't know. I don't know because my experience isn't with other web frameworks outside of the Python environment. So I don't know. But presumably there should be a way to do that. I'm guessing there should be a way. I'm guessing there might be wrappers, Ruby wrappers around Python code. I'm presuming. I could be wrong. But I don't know. I don't know, unfortunately. My experience is mostly on Python. So sorry about that. Anyone else who have any questions they want to bring up to the forefront, feel free to ask right now or post in the chat, and I can prioritize it based upon our agenda. But regardless, I want to make more progress on our project, flesh certain things out. Yes, it's a rather bare bones project. Nothing too exciting at the moment, but it's going to force us to use some of these concepts that we've been learning in office hours. as well as um, being it rather general for you to contribute to it. I want to have something where you can contribute to it, so you can tell people that you've contributed to projects. While there might be a small part, will give you that first step to contributing to bigger and better projects. So that's the objective to keep in mind as we go forward. So that said, do let me know if anything else comes up. But let's go ahead and keep track of our project here. I see that Sue Johnson is asking, can one engage you personally, perhaps through email or any other platform as you may please? You can always find me on LinkedIn. I posted my LinkedIn information last time in one of the office hours. You can find me. You can connect me there. I do ask that if you were to do that, if you were to connect to me on LinkedIn, that you please indicate how I know you. The reason I say that is because I get requests quite often from people who I don't know the name. I don't know their names. So I like to connect with people who I do know. So I know there's a big course, so I don't know everyone's by name. So if you say, hey, I was a student from World Quant, that's all I need, right? Oh, okay, you're a World Quant student. Sometimes I do recognize your name if you were participating, let's say, in the forum, in the office hours, so I might remember your name. But I do ask that you indicate how you know me, right? So I know that you're not a stranger, and I can accept your connection, and you can always have communicate me via that end. So I'll go ahead and put my profile here in the chat once again. So keep in mind, if you do connect with me, you do ask, you do indicate how you know me. Yeah, I miss you guys too. All right, so you're already connected. So yeah, if you have anything you want to ask me, feel free to ask me in LinkedIn. All right, and you'll also have access to my personal, I will let you know, my personal GitHub page. So there's always communication there as well, because I'm going to host this project on my personal GitHub. All right, I see Joel is connecting. All right, so may not accept during office hours because I'll be doing office hours, but you're more than welcome to connect right now, and I will accept it shortly after office hours. So all right, I'm looking forward to your connection, Joel. All right. So let's see. I think my pod went down. Looks like, wait, did it go down? No, I think it's fine. Is it? Let's see. Control panel. My pod is working. For some reason, I thought it wasn't working there. All right, let's go into data course. Let's go into the WQU project, and let's take a inventory of what we've got. Let's open up app. Let's open up app and see what we've got. All right, so we got a couple endpoints, a couple routes here. We got the main, we got the greet, and we got, yeah, that's about it. So let's go ahead and, okay, so one thing we didn't talk about is, let's see. How about we get to some, let me go ahead and mute my notifications. All right, sorry about that. Okay. So I am going to go ahead and give me a sec. I'm going to do some moving things around. I'm going to be moving some files around. I'm going to open up new terminal. So let's practice working the command line. So cd into data course. And then I will cd into the World Quant project. And there are my files. And I will create a directory called app. Create a directory called just simply app. And actually, let's call it WQ app. A little more descriptive. WQU app. And I'm going to move those files. I'm going to move the app py. Well, let's see what files I have here. I have app py, message py. I'm going to move those into the WQU app. I'm going to move those files. Move app, move message into WQU app. Move those there. And the reason is I'm organizing my file. I'm organizing my project. And there, okay. I think that's fine. And then what I'm going to do is let's go ahead and revisit what we've got. So now that I move that, move it there. Someone's saying the end of course survey does not seem to be displaying correctly. Please take a look at the first 2 questions as an example. Interesting. Thank you for pointing that out. And I will take a look at that. Maybe something is going wrong with the post-course survey. So I appreciate you looking into that. Let's see. Interesting. So what I see some what appears to be some characters of, I don't know if it's Chinese characters or Japanese characters. I'm unable to recognize those characters, those languages, but it appears to be, I see some of those perhaps Chinese or Japanese characters. Paolo, do you see that as well? Is that the problem you see when you go onto the post-course survey? Do let me know. Perhaps I would bring it up. Yes, there's only one radio button. Yeah, that's a little weird, right? How would you rate the overall course? That's a little strange. In fact, I will make a note of it. I will bring it up to the people who maintain the survey. And let's see what they say. Okay, so thank you for bringing that up, Paolo. I'll go talk to people. Maybe they can fix it. Maybe they can fix the survey. So I do appreciate that you bringing that up. All right, let's go into app PY. Let's go ahead and do some modifications of our code. And what I'm going to do is I am simply going to, let's see, I'll make the main one do the greeting. I'll do that. I'll return the greeting. Right. In fact, well, actually, I know I'm being a little distracted today. Let's go into messages PY. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to have greet. Let's see, what should I have greet do? I'm going to have greet just return. No, that's fine. Just ignore me. I'm just going to have it as is, or returns the string here. But what I'm going to do is here, I'm going to just return the call of greet. And then, however, we're not making use of any HTML. Notice we haven't written any HTML just yet. So what if we want to make use of HTML in our project? Well, if we want to make use of any HTML in our project, we're going to go into our project page, or this WQU app. We're going to create a new directory. We're going to create a folder called templates. We're going to rename this. Let's say templates. And in this directory, we put in any HTML we want to render in our application. So let's go into templates, and we're going to create a new file, text file new. I'm going to call this index HTML. Okay, it looks like I posted the incorrect version, so thank you for pointing that out. I don't know how I got the incorrect version. I guess a new one was sent out, and I haven't. Looks like I haven't been given the correct one yet. So I do appreciate that. Okay, so in here I'm going to define a very simple HTML file. I'm going to say, and I don't write HTML for a living, so it's going to be a little crude. And then HTML, and then I have head, and I'm going to put as a title, my title tag right here, title. I'm going to put here, call this WQU project. And then I will have, perhaps, that's fine, that's sufficient, and I will create a body. I will end this in this tag. You can notice that HTML is a collection of tags. Then here I have body, my body tag, and then maybe in here I will have something rather simple, something like a div tag with text content. And what I want to have here is another paragraph tag where I'm going to put the greeting. I'm going to put here the greeting. I call that message. Let's go and end that div tag. And the body. There you go. Very simple. Nothing too exciting. I write a very simple HTML. Let's go ahead and recap that. Someone's saying I should perhaps indicate it is UTF-8. And I forgot to close it. You can tell I don't really write HTML. And I think, if I recall, where do you put the HTML UTF-8? I think that's a meta character. Okay. It's very simple, right? Very simple. I have my head there with just a title, WorldCoin application. I have a body. In that body, just in here, I'm going to put the message. So right here, this here isn't HTML. What this is here is we're going to use a program called Jinja. And what Jinja is a way to render HTML. It's a way to allow us to render HTML using Python. And this here is a placeholder. This here is telling Python, is going to tell Jinja, which is going to take this HTML and render it, that there's going to be content called message that will be placed right there. It's a placeholder. Yeah, I think, yeah. And feel free to, Timur, feel free to, once I host this publicly, feel free to add modifications to it. So since I don't have too much experience with writing HTML. I do enough of it. I do enough to get me by. So if I were to save this and I were to go here back to my project, what I'm going to do is I want to render the HTML. So from Flask, I'm going to import render template. And what I'm going to return is the output of render template. I specify the template name, index.html, and then I pass any variables that are needed to render the template. So if I go back here to my template, notice there's a placeholder here called message. I want that to be placed right there. So if I go to my app file, I'm going to say render this template. Oh, and by the way, message, that placeholder, it's going to be equal to the output of calling the greet function. Let's save that. Let's save that there. So we go here to our command line, and let's see. And I'm going to, WQU project. I'm going to say I got to activate my virtual environment. Let's not forget about that. So source vim bin activate. So now I'm going to use the Python installation in that virtual environment. Not our systems, the one we have in our virtual environment. And I will say python-m. I'm going to run my Flask app. And I'm running my Flask app. So now let's go ahead and open it up. And remember, there was a funny name, right? Not a funny name, but it was a little tricky on our pods because we're running through a proxy. So let's see. I hit enter, and there is the message. Although I don't see the title. The title, if I hover, WQU project. Perhaps I want it to be a little more different, a little bit different. So in other words, if I go back here, and let's say I'm going to add, I don't know, some sort of header. Let's add a header to it. Let's see, maybe right here I will add a header and say WQU project. Save that there. Let's go back. Let's refresh. I think I should just need to refresh here. There we go. Now I modified my template with that title, with that little header. And in fact, I can go back here. I can say, well, that's fine. I was going to put a little longer message. But now I modify my template. And this is what I get now. It's nothing too fancy, but now I know how to render HTML. So you can imagine we have something more complicated, a more complicated project, a more complicated web page. We would have the HTML there, and we can pass variables that need to be part of the rendering process. Right? In fact, if I go here and I say view page source, right, here is the HTML that I wrote, right, showing me the original source. All right. So going back there, I'm going to go ahead and save that. And let's go back to the command line. Let me know if there are any questions. And let me know if there are any questions. Okay. Do let me know if they come up. But what I want to do here is let's do git. Let's use git. Right? Let's go ahead and play around with git because we haven't played with git at all. So let's examine what we've got. And I'm going to do git add. And I'm going to add the... I got to sneeze. Hold on. All right, sorry about that. Okay. So if I go into WQ app, I have a couple files that I want to add to my project. So let's add them. Git add app.py, message.py, and templates, the templates directory. I want to commit. My commit message is add initial project files. That's what I did right there. Let me back up. Do git status. Tell me all the files that currently are not being tracked. And notice my requirement.txt file isn't tracked. I'm going to say git add requirements.txt. So I hit enter and I'm ready to commit. Git commit and I say add requirements.txt. At the requirements.txt, I've committed it. I type in git log. And there are those two commit messages. Now, you might be wondering why I haven't committed this directory, the virtual environment. And the reason why is because the virtual environment is something you don't want to commit to your repo. And the reason why is because it's not required. However, you might be wondering, why isn't it required? Don't I need that virtual environment to run the project? And the answer is yes. However, we give people the ingredients to create that virtual environment. So instead of polluting our project with the virtual environment to run it, instead of polluting our code repository, our code base, with the actual virtual environment committed to our repo, we instead commit the requirements file, the recipe needed to create the virtual environment. So in fact, since I want to make sure that the virtual environment isn't committed by accident, for example, maybe I'm doing git, I'm adding files and whatnot, and I accidentally add it to my project. I could very much do git add venv by accident. What I want to do instead is I'm going to create a git ignore file. I think I might have talked about this. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to go to my project root directory, create a text file. I'm going to call this text file git ignore. And this file here, Git is going to take a look at and see what are patterns, what are files that we should ignore. And this is going to help us from accidentally tracking anything we don't want to track. We don't want to pollute our code repo with files that shouldn't be tracked, like the virtual environment directory. So we're going to add it to git ignore. So that's what we're going to go ahead and do. We're going to put venv. So now it knows to ignore venv. So let's go back to the terminal. Of course, we have to add the git ignore. We got to add it. So git add, git ignore, and git commit. And our commit message is very simple. Add git ignore. All right. So now, if I type in git status, it ignores the venv directory. Because before it was in here, it's called in the list of untracked files. But now that I told Git to ignore it, it's no longer in there. However, I still see another directory that I have yet to commit. this directory called dunder pycache dunder. Let's investigate that. What is that directory? I go in there and I see a message scipython pyc. Well, I have a file called message, so maybe that's derived from that. CPython, 37, perhaps the version of Python I'm using. Well, let's go ahead and investigate that. I do message, I do head, take a look at the content of that file, and it's probably going to crash. Well, what these files are is a compiled bytecode. So what Python does is when you run a file in Python, Python takes that file and converts it to Python bytecode. In other words, what bytecode is a set of instructions on how the program runs. And then the Python interpreter takes those set of bytecodes and then executes it. So in here is a Python bytecode. We don't want this to be in our project. We don't want to pollute our code repo with these pycache directories. We don't want to. There's no need for it. So let's make sure that we add it to our git ignore. I'm going to go here. I'm going to add it to my git ignore. So there, I add it there. Of course, I need to commit that change. So I do git status. Right? I see that I have been modified git ignore. So I do git diff, right? I can do git diff to see what the difference is. Oh yeah, I've added pycache, of course. And I can say git add -u dot is just a shorthand to say let's commit all the files that are currently being tracked. Let's add them to the staging area. I could say git add git ignore, but if I'm being lazy, I can say git add -u dot. So this here is going to add all the files being tracked by git to the staging area. And I say git commit, and I say add, or I can say ignore pycache. And let me type in git log. There's my message. And git status. Git status. Did I not do that? Did I mess up? Let's see. I might have messed up. Git status. Let's see, git log. Yeah, I think I messed up. Oh well. Git add, git ignore. Oops. Git ignore. Git commit. And let's see, git status. Git commit. And say ignore pycache. All right. Git log, and yep, there it is. Git status as a sanity check. All right. So now I am ready to go. Let me know if there are any questions people have. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and march on. And let's go ahead and remember how we wanted to, when someone visits our page, that we get the person's IP address. And that's what we use to figure out their zip code. So I'm going to add this new functionality to my code. So I'm going to do, let's create a branch. I'm going to do git checkout -b. I'm going to say get IP address. That's what I'm going to call this branch, because that's what it's going to do. It's going to get the person's IP address. So let's go ahead and flesh that out. Let's go back here. And what's going to happen, the way this is going to work, is that I'm going to say, let's see. The way to get the person's IP address is we're going to import from Flask the request object. And this request object contains the data that is in the request. And in the request, there is an attribute called headers. What our headers are basically, think of some metadata that makes up our request. Remember when we work with HTTP, a hypertext protocol, is that we have a client-server paradigm. We send a request to some service, and this sends us back a response. And in the request, in the body is data, but in the request there is a header, a set of information about the request. And in that information of those headers is the IP address. So I'm going to, from Flask, I'm going to import request. And when I say request, I don't know why this is messed up. I think index, tab, spacing's messed up. There in the headers, there is a keyword called x forwarded for. And this here has the IP address. I'm going to set this equal to IP address equal. And then since I have the person's IP address, if I go into message, notice how my greet function calls retrieve IP address. And this here is retrieving the local IP address. Not the IP address of whoever visits my application, but the IP address of the location of the server running the application. I don't want that. I want to get the IP address of whoever visits my application. So instead, I'm going to remove this line here. I'm going to call this retrieve local IP address, return IP address of our computer. Just rename it to signify that this is the IP address of the server hosting the application. And this greet should accept as an argument the IP address. So now if we go back to our project, save there, we get the IP address. And then we call greet, but of course now it accepts the IP address, so we can pass it right there. IP address, hit save. Okay. So let's see. Let me know if there's any questions. Do git status. Right, we've modified 2 files. That makes sense. Let's type in git diff, tells us what we modified. This here means there's a tab or there's some sort of spacing that I probably should remove. So let me go ahead and fix that. Going to app.py, remove that unneeded spacing, hit save. Go back to the terminal. Git diff, there you go. We've modified, remove this line, and replace it with these lines. Okay. And now we're going to go ahead and go back and say, you can think of these 2 things as doing one thing together, those changes. So I'm going to put them together as one commit. I can take multiple changes and package them into one commit message, which is the thing to do when those changes in across multiple files really are part of the same logical unit. Do git add. And since I'm going to do this shortcut of git add -u dot. So this says add all the files that have currently been modified, that are currently being tracked to the staging area. And now I say git commit. I'm going to say support getting visitors IP address. Okay. So I think that has worked out. And now I'm going to git checkout master, and let's merge that branch into master. So git merge, and I called that branch, what I call it? I called it get IP address. So get IP address. And now I to type in git log, and there is those commit messages. They've been merged into master. Okay. All right. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a new branch called git checkout makefile. Because I'm not in my git repo. Git checkout -b makefile. Now let's briefly talk about makefiles. It's important to know that they exist and what they are exactly. A makefile is basically a text file of a collection of recipes. A collection of what are called rules and recipes. And what these rules and recipes are all about is how to construct a file, or how to construct sets of files and directories based upon some set of instructions. And notice and the whole point of makefiles is to make it easier to install and get an application working. Make it a lot easier for the user to get it up and working. Makefile is for, I believe, only Unix-like operating systems, Mac OS and Linux. So keep that in mind. So here I'm going to open up a new directory, new text file. I'm going to call this makefile. Hit OK. And in this makefile, one of the things that I want to be done very easily is the creation of my virtual environment. I want to be able to let users on a Unix-like operating system to very easily create a virtual environment. Remember how we did it before? The command was, remember how before, to create the virtual environment. Let's see, I'm going to deactivate my virtual environment. And remember before, let me remove that virtual environment. Delete it. I've deleted my virtual environment, but if I want to create it, I do python 3-m venv. And that's going to create that virtual environment directory. And then I got to activate it, source venv bin activate, and then I can install. I do pip install requirements txt. And now I have the virtual environment up and running. I do pip freeze, see what's installed, and there it is. So that wasn't too bad, right? That wasn't too bad doing that. And I can memorize it and do it every time I have my project. I'm ready to go. But I want to be able to wrap this into a file that I can invoke when I want to recreate my project. And that's where makefiles come into play. So I'm going to say venv. This here is called our target. This here is what we're going to make. We're going to make a directory, a file called venv. In this case, it's a directory. We're going to create a directory called venv. And what we want to do is, what follows the colon is the dependencies, the requirements to make the target. So this is our target. What comes next is the dependencies. And we're going to say requirements txt. Because in order to make our virtual environment, this directory called venv, we need this file. I'm going to hit enter. I'm going to hit tab. It's very important that it has to be tab. Make files work with tabs. Cannot be white space. Cannot be spaces. In here, we write out the recipe. How do we construct this target with this set of requirements, with this set of ingredients? Well, if you recall, what I did was Python -m vem venv. In fact, I'm going to slightly modify what we typically do. I'm going to write this line here, test -d bar Python -m vem vem. This here is basically a check. It's going to test whether this directory exists. If it doesn't, it runs this instead. So this here is going to avoid creating the virtual environment if it already exists. We test that it exists. If it doesn't, then we do this. That's what that line means right there. And then we will proceed to, once we create the virtual environment, then what we do is we need to install those requirements. So we do source venv bin activate. That's going to activate our virtual environment. And then right after we activate it, then we call pip install. So in order to follow a command to run right after a successful command, we use &&. So run the command source venv bin activate. We activate the virtual environment, and then we install. We do pip install -r requirements txt. And that is our first rule we construct with our makefile. Any questions about these makefiles? Okay. A couple of things we're going to flesh out. We're going to flesh out some additional rules. We're going to flesh out a rule called clean. And all that clean is going to do is just clean up our project. And specifically, it's going to remove our virtual environment. Maybe we want to start from scratch. So this here is going to delete our virtual environment. Someone is asking, what is the extension of a makefile? No file extension. It has no file extension. And then I'm going to create a, in fact, let's try it out. In fact, I'm going to erase this here because I want to play around with what we have so far. So I'm going to go into the command line right there. I'm going to deactivate my virtual environment. Deactivate. And I'm going to delete my virtual environment. Delete venv. Delete my virtual environment. But now I'm going to say, in order to run my makefile, what I do is I call make and then the target. We call the target venv. So make venv. Hit enter. Make command not found. I guess we don't have make here installed in our pod, so let's go install it. Get app update. Sudo app get. We don't have. Let's do app get update. Let's see. Permission denied. Sudo su. Okay, looks like we don't have permissions to install programs onto our pod, but we needed to install a makefile. So we need to install the program that runs the makefile. So unfortunately, I'm unable to demonstrate it, but you can take my word for it. So we're going to go define this clean, and what clean does, it removes our virtual environment. And then we define another target called all, and what all does, it specifies what should run if I decide to do run make all. How do I initialize my project? Which would be called venv, which would be, sorry, to be called clean, and then venv. And this is what's called a, well, let's not get into that. So the beauty of the makefile is that how it works is that if I were to run make venv and I create my virtual environment, and then right afterwards I proceed to call make venv again, the makefile keeps track. It understands what was the last time it was run. And then it says, have the ingredients been modified since the last time I ran the file? And if it has, if that is the case, then it runs the actual command once again. Because if the ingredients change, in this case requirements txt change, then that means that potentially venv, what's in the virtual environment, is going to change. So you think it's going to help you out? I make venv. If venv doesn't exist, it creates it. If I call make venv again, it says, oh, have requirements, the dependencies have changed? If not, no point in running make venv. If it has, then it will run again. I'm going to go ahead and add touch venv. And this here touch modifies the timestamp of creation of a file if it doesn't exist, if it already exists. And this here will make our makefile in sync, or let me call it. So I'm going to hit save. Makefiles can get complicated. We can spend hours talking about makefiles, but I'm letting you know that there's such thing that exists that might be something you might want to look out for, want to look up for your future projects. So here I'm going to say git status, right? Add makefile and then commit. So add makefile. Git checkout master and do git merge makefile. I think I had lowercase. All right. And there is the commit. Okay. So we have almost everything ready to deploy our project. Right now we got it to work on our personal computer, but that's not too exciting. It'd be very nice if we can take this application and deploy it to the World Wide Web. That's what that's what we've been building up to throughout the entire course, throughout the entire program. So let's go ahead and get that started. Let's talk about what we need for deployment. And what we need for deployment, we need a couple of things, and I'll outline that right here. So for deployment is we need a requirements file. Requirements txt. We need a file called runtime txt, and we need a file called procfile, and I will explain what these are, by the way. Procfile, and I think that's it. Oh, and of course the most important thing is an account. An account on the deployment platform. In other words, I need to have an account on a service that will allow me to easily deploy applications. I don't want to, I can, if I wanted to, I can rent a server and I can create a web application for my server. I can do that. But that's going to be a lot of work, some learning, a steep learning curve to get that running. That's not entirely possible. But instead, let's just make our lives easier. Let's make use of a third-party service that's going to make it very easy for us to host our web applications. One such service is called Heroku. And Heroku is a free service. In fact, you don't have to put your credit card down to sign up. You can create an account for Heroku, and it will let you deploy web applications. It is free. It lets you deploy up to 5 web applications, I believe. And it will host it for you. It will host that project for you. So the first thing we need is a Heroku account. Now, if you want to follow along at home, you have to sign up with Heroku. So do take the moment. We probably won't do the actual deployment today. We'll probably do it tomorrow morning, tomorrow's office hours. But be forewarned, you need to sign up for Heroku to follow exactly at home. So we need an account on a deployment platform like Heroku. The next thing we do need is a requirements.txt file. The reason why we need this file is because Heroku needs this file, which tells it what are the Python packages that I need, that the platform needs to install to get the application running. Our application relies on a couple of packages. Heroku says, hey, make sure you have a requirements.txt file, because I will look at that file and I will know what are the requirements for the project. What do I need to install to run your application? And we have this requirements.txt file already. There's actually one package we are missing. We'll talk about that just in a bit and why we're missing it. The other thing we need is we need a text file called runtime.txt. I already slashed it out, but runtime.txt. What runtime.txt is basically a file that Heroku is going to look at and figure out what is the language of our application. In other words, what is the runtime environment of our application? And it's just a simple text file that has Python and the version of Python we are running. So let's go ahead and do git checkout, and we'll call it Heroku. I'm going to create a branch that's going to modify our project to get ready for deployment on Heroku. So git checkout -p Heroku. And I'm going to create a file called runtime.txt. And it's going to have Python. Well, actually, I'm kind of curious to see what version of Python we are using. Python -- version. All right, we're using Python 3.7.3. So let's just be consistent. So I'm going to create a file. I'm going to say echo. Echo allows me to display something. So I'm going to do Python -3 .7.3, and I'm going to redirect that output that should have been to the screen. I'm going to output it, redirect it to a file called runtime.txt. This is just a quick way for me to create a file with the very simple line. I'm going to call cat. Cat displays the contents of a file to the screen. So cat runtime.txt. And there it is, Python -3.7.3. You could have create a new text file just like we've been doing before and adding that line. I just found it a lot easier to echo this, in other words, print it out. But instead of sending it to the screen, I redirected it. That's what that dash line, that arrow means. Redirected into a file called runtime.txt. All right. So I have that runtime.txt. Now, the next thing I need is something called a proc file. Now, before we talk about proc files, let's talk about web server gate interface. Now, web server gate interface is basically a fancy way of saying, I need some piece of code that's going to stand in between the server and my Python application. So here is my Python application. I need right here in the middle, I need a piece of software called Web Server Gate Interface. And what it is because our Python application has no way of communicating with the server. The server is right here. The server is going to accept requests from people. And your application needs a way to take those requests and a way to send those requests back to the users. And that is going to be done through this Web Server Gate Interface. So this here is some sort of program I need to get my final application running. But you might be wondering, hey, I already got my web application to work locally. I got Flask to work locally. So why do I need this other piece of software to make it work when I deploy it? I already showed how it works. Well, the reason why is because Flask already comes in, built in, a very simple web server gate interface. It's a very simple one that's mostly just meant for development purposes, mostly just meant for developing your application. It is not meant for production. Every time you hear the word production, that is the environment in which your application is going to exist for the wider audience. We develop locally, right? We develop environment, but now we're going to push it into production. So what we need is a production level web server gate interface, and that is not provided by Flask. So we need that last Python package to interface. And there is one. There are several. There are two main ones I can think of. But the one I'm thinking about right now that we're going to use is called Junicorn. Junicorn standing for green unicorn. It's a Python web server gate interface. And this one is meant for production. This one will be able to handle multiple requests coming from the server. You can imagine when we deploy our application, there might be several people trying to access our application at the same time. This production level WSGI, as it's called, Web Server Gate Interface, will be able to scale more efficiently than what's built into Flask. So we got to install this. So I will go ahead and, in a requirements.txt file, add a new line, Junicorn. Hit save. And now what I'm going to do is I've got to create this proc file. Rename proc file. And what this proc file does is Heroku is going to take a look at it, and it tells you how to run the application. So it's a web application, so we say web. That's what that stands for right there. And then what follows next is Junicorn. It's going to invoke the Junicorn program. Then we specify the Python path where our project exists. And our project exists in a directory called WQU project. WQU app. Right, exists in a directory called WQU app. The specific Flask application object exists in a file called app.py, and it's called app. That's what we want to run. So what follows is the name of the file in which the Flask object exists and the name of the Flask object we want to run. So let me recap what this proc file does. Heroku's going to take a look at this proc file. It says, okay, it's a web application. We want it to run Junicorn. So we say Junicorn right there, the web server gate interface, the middle person between the requests coming in from the outside world and your application. Then we give it this option. This is an option saying Python path. We're going to specify where it exists. It exists in a directory called WQU app. in that directory, there's a Python file called app. And in that Python file, the Flask object that we create that needs to be run is also called app. Hit save. And now we have all the pieces of information to get our application deployed on Heroku. And we will pick that up tomorrow, finally deploying on Heroku. And then we will host the project on my personal GitHub. And then we'll go through and we'll talk about issues on GitHub and perhaps things that you can contribute to improve on this project. With that said, are there any questions before we wrap it up? I know I'm a little over in time, but I wanted to end at a good point. But any questions you want to bring up right now before we wrap it up for today? Okay. Git status, and I will finally add those files. Add requirements txt, git commit. Let's say add Junicorn. And add git proc file, git commit. Add proc file. Git add runtime txt, git add commit runtime txt. Git add git status and git commit add runtime txt. Git log, there are my changes, and I want to go ahead and just, well, maybe we're over time. I'll go ahead and do that tomorrow. We'll talk about squashing commits together. With that said, guys, take care and hope you have a good rest of your day. And we'll see you tomorrow when we pick up and finally deploy our application to Heroku. Hopefully it works out. So there might be some debugging on our end, but we're going to go ahead and now open our project once we host it on GitHub for everyone else who's following at home to contribute and to improve on the project. And I will be, of course, the referee about your